We all know that one person who thinks they know everything, right? But they don't, because nobody can know everything about everything. If they could, we wouldn't have so many mind-boggling mysteries that even the smartest historians, archaeologists, and scientists can't figure out. We've got a whole bunch of those mysteries for you in this video, so get ready to have your mind blown. Let's begin with a megalith that goes by two names, Sail Rock and Paris Rock. It's a colossal sandstone monolith close to the shore of the Black Sea in Krasnodar Krai, Russia, and has been standing since the late Cretaceous age. The Sail Rock name comes from the distinctive shape of the massive rock, which looks a little like a ship's sail. The very existence of the rock seems to fly in the face of logic. It's 80 feet tall, 60 feet wide, but only about 3 feet thick at its thickest point. Weathering should have forced it to crumble thousands of years ago, but it remains standing. There's a large hole in the surface of Sail Rock, and nobody knows how it got there. The most commonly told story is that it was created as a defense against mountain artillery during the Caucasian War, but there's no evidence to support this. Sail Rock has been declared as a national monument in Russia since 1971 and is cared for by the local council, but there's no restriction on people visiting or even climbing on it. That might have to change if Sail Rock is to stick around for future generations to see. If you've ever wondered what Roman aristocrats did to pass the time between drinking wine and hosting parties, wonder no longer. Apparently, they were playing games using dice towers like this one, which was discovered almost exactly in between the villages of Freudsheim and Fettweisse in Germany in 1985. Based on the inscriptions on its surface, it may even have been a birthday gift. The text on one side celebrates a presumably recent military victory over the Picts, and the other side conveys good wishes to the gift's recipient. To be precise, it says, "Use this and live luckily," which is fairly blunt as goodwill messages go. Perhaps the Romans weren't big on sentiment. It's a remarkably complicated structure given its trivial use. Dice would be dropped in at the top and plunged through 3 levels before emerging down the steps at the bottom, ringing bells on their way out. While we understand what it does, we don't have any information about the type of game it was used to play. The Romans definitely weren't sitting around tables playing Monopoly. So, what was this cute dice thrower used for? Whenever the weather outside turns cold and you switch on your central heating, remember to thank the ancient Romans. They came up with the idea. The ancient Roman equivalent of the kind of central heating we know and love today was the hypocaust. They were a common feature in the homes of wealthy people in the Roman Empire 2,000 years ago. Seneca, one of the most popular and respected writers of the era, had a hypocaust in his villa and wrote of it often. He considered it to be the height of luxury. And he was probably right. To make a hypocaust, Roman builders included spaces between the walls and floors of new buildings. They'd then place a fireplace into a corner of the building. The heat generated by the fire entered the spaces between the floors and walls and heated the entire property. With a big enough fire and an intelligent enough design, a single hypocaust system would be sufficient to heat a whole Roman bathhouse. This simple but effective design remained in use for several centuries. In fact, there's no reason why it couldn't be used in parts of the world where no central heating exists today. The Dendera Zodiac is a bas-relief that once formed part of a chapel dedicated to Osiris within the Hathor Temple in Dendera, a place that's already well known for the famous Dendera light bulb. Much like the Dendera light bulb, a lot of what we think appears in the Dendera Zodiac is down to a matter of interpretation. Most experts can agree that Taurus is represented by the inclusion of a bull, and Libra is there because the bas-relief includes scales. What experts can't agree on is its age. Some, like Jean-François Champollion, believe it to be from the late Ptolemaic period of around 2,300 years ago. Others, like John H. Rogers, think it's far older, dating to the New Kingdom period of 3,400 years ago. If Rogers and those who share his opinion are correct, the Dendera zodiac might be the oldest ancient Egyptian attempt to draw a map of the night sky that still exists today. It might even have been the starting point of the complex system of astrology that later developed in Egypt. The entire bas-relief is now on display in the Louvre in Paris, France. We're heading to Arizona, USA next, because we're going to check out the Petrified Forest National Park just outside Holbrook. This area hosts the largest collection of petrified wood in the known world, and is also home to some huge fossils that are more than 200 million years old. The park covers an area of almost 150 square miles, extending into the Painted Desert to the north. During the Mesozoic era, the petrified forest was on the equator of the former supercontinent known as Pangaea. The climate would have been subtropical, a far cry from the arid desert of today. You'll still find a few out-of-place looking trees in the national park today, but most of them are so old that they've turned to stone. Camping in the Petrified Forest National Park is illegal, but if you're desperate to see it and spend some time here, you can take advantage of the motels and hotels offered by the neighboring communities. There isn't another national park like it in America. In fact, there probably isn't another national park like it in the whole world. Is Lindholm Høje in Nordresund, Denmark a stone circle? Well, it is in a way, but it's also much more than that. This field of jagged standing stones contains circles, but it also contains lines and other patterns. Rather than being an ancient calendar of the kind that many historians suspect most stone circles to be, Lindholm Høje is a huge cemetery that still holds the bodies of more than 700 Vikings. The first burials here actually took place in the early 4th century, long before the start of the Viking Age, but they became more frequent during the Viking era before suddenly coming to an unexplained halt in the early 10th century. The hillside location of the cemetery offers an excellent view of nearby Aalborg, but the city didn't even exist when the last person was laid to rest here. It would have been nothing but open fields. The unusual patterns made by the rocks sometimes appear to be effigies of longboats, with pointed stones at each end. There's also some evidence of large fires at the site, so the stone boats might have stood in for the real thing during traditional Viking funerals. Next up, it's Newspaper Rock in Monticello, Utah. This is one of the largest collections of petroglyphs in the world, serving as a record of more than 2,000 years of human activity in the region. The massive sandstone slab can be found in San Juan County. It's a stunning thing to look at, but understanding it is far more difficult. The precise meaning of many of the glyphs is unknown. The markings were made in sequence by the archaic, basket maker, Fremont, and Pueblo cultures, with the final glyphs added by Navajo and Anglo tribesmen. In the native Navajo language, Newspaper Rock is known as Tisehane, which means the rock that tells a story. There are more than 650 individual designs here, created by chipping away at the dark coating of so-called desert varnish that clings to the rock. Some of the designs are easy to identify as humans and animals, but there are also abstract designs that appear to be humanoid but with horns on their heads. It's entirely possible that we'll never understand all of the stories being told here. The ancient site of Jarlshof in Somburg, Scotland, looks like something that was taken from the pages of a Tolkien novel and then recreated by a present-day movie crew. Instead, this archaeological wonder is both genuine and ancient. Nobody lives here today, but Jarlshof was occupied for a very long time. The oldest structures at the site were created during the Bronze Age, with the most recent added as recently as the early 18th century. Somehow, the site managed to be forgotten almost as soon as it was abandoned, only for it to be rediscovered by archaeologists of the 19th century after a storm in the region raised the cliffs and exposed the ancient stones. The oldest Bronze Age village at Jarlshof was erected around 4,500 years ago, upon which another village was built during the Iron Age, and then another was built by Norse invaders in the early 9th century. The only surviving structure that's above ground level today is the old house of Somborg, which is said in folklore to be the first castle ever built by Scotsmen. It's the grass topping that's grown across so many of the structures at Jarlshof that gives it its fantasy-like air, but you have to peer beneath the grass to see the area's true history. Seeing as we're in Scotland, where we'll also find many examples of Neolithic art, let's talk about the mysteries known as either the Towie stones or Towie balls. They're sometimes labeled more simply as the carved stone balls, which isn't a very imaginative title. The balls are not especially rare, but finding multiple examples of them doesn't get us any closer to understanding why they were made, or what they were used for. The first example turned up in Aberdeenshire in the 19th century, but more of them were still being found as recently as 2013. They're small enough to fit in the palm of your hand, measuring on average between 2 and 5 inches in diameter, and can be made of any common rock, from granite to sandstone. Rather than being spherical, they're deliberately covered in raised areas and decorated with intricate lines and circle patterns. Similar patterns have also been found on artifacts belonging to the Picts, who lived in Scotland 2,800 years ago. But the stones are far older than that. Some are thought to be more than 5,000 years old. Theories as to their use range from their potential use as weapons to a sort of resume carried around by masons to demonstrate their skills when seeking paid employment. But they're just guesses. It would be a little glib to describe Men on Toll in Cornwall, England, as a stone circle inside a stone circle, but it would also technically be accurate. The stone circle is a landmark in this part of the Cornish countryside, and at the heart of it is a circular stone with a hole carved through the center of it like a giant donut. Dating stones and rocks is notoriously difficult for archaeologists, so experts aren't sure whether Men on Toll dates to the Neolithic era or the Bronze Age. Either way, it's safe to say that the stones were cut and positioned here several thousand years ago. Local legends say that the circular stone is a magic portal, and that passing through it will improve your health. It might even make you more fertile in the process. It's also said that the circle is guarded by a type of fairy known as a piskie, and that the piskie will harshly punish anybody who attempts to damage the stone. The mysterious aura of the site is enhanced by the fact that it's almost totally hidden by farmland and can't be seen by visitors until they're almost on top of it. We're looking at discoveries old and new in this video, so here's one that comes from 1867. It's the Heinz-Govel dagger, which was found on the Danish island of Genoa. Experts consider it the finest example of a fishtail flint dagger in existence, and say that it comes from the end of the Nordic Stone Age. That would make it around 3,800 years old. In Denmark, the Heinz-Govel dagger is considered a national cultural icon, so much so that it appears on the country's 100 krona banknote. The description of the artifact as a fishtail dagger comes from the shape of its handle, although you could also argue that the shape of the blade looks like a fish too. It's thought that their design was based on bronze daggers made elsewhere in Europe. Some of these daggers found their way to Denmark, and although the ancient Danes couldn't replicate them, they were able to make something similar from local flint. Similar daggers continued to be made well into the region's Bronze Age, so it was a design that lasted for several centuries. The Naqsh-e-Rustam complex in Iran is a place that contains many ancient mysteries, but few buildings there provoke as much interest as the Ka'aba-ye-Zartosht. The name translates into English as the Cube of Zoroaster, but it's actually a replica of the Prison of Solomon in Pasargadae, which was the first capital of the ancient Achaemenid Empire. Legend has it that within the structure there was once a fire that never went out, and that this fire was the source of all similar fires that once burned inside Zoroastrian temples. However, a lack of ventilation inside the Ka'aba-ye-Zartosht means this is unlikely to have been the case, unless the ancient inhabitants of Naqsh-e-Rustam had a means of keeping a flame burning without it. The cube has been studied by countless academics, historians, and archaeologists, but there's still no consensus about its true purpose. Almost every expert agrees that it served a religious function, but nobody knows what the religious function was. The structure stands exactly opposite the mausoleum of Darius II, who ruled 2,400 years ago. So there may be a connection, but it's a connection we can only guess at. We live in a world full of wonders, both old and new. However, not all of those wonders are easy to understand. Often we can only guess at the motivations of the people who lived hundreds or even thousands of years before we were born, and why and how they did things. Other times we find ourselves marveling at things created by entirely natural processes. We hope this video gives you a sense of wonder. There are plenty of scientists who believe that the Pesce canoe is the oldest boat in the world. It's certainly the world's oldest canoe. Carbon dating tests indicate that this canoe was hollowed out and used during the early Mesolithic era, somewhere between the years 8040 and 7510 BCE. That means the canoe could be more than 10,000 years old. You'll find the Pesce canoe in the Drents Museum of Assen, Netherlands today, but it was found during the construction of the Dutch A28 motorway in 1955, not far from the village of Pessa, hence the artifact's name. Wooden artifacts don't usually survive for 10,000 years, but this one has been preserved because it became trapped in a peat bog. There was once some speculation about whether the canoe would have been seaworthy, but that debate ended in 2001 when the archaeologist Jaap Bucher created an exact replica and paddled it down a river. From marks left on the surface of the canoe, which is made from a Scots pine log, indicate that the tools used to hollow it out were made of flint and antler. We don't know the name of the culture that created it, and probably never will. There are quite a few objects and artifacts that are claimed by their proponents to feature the oldest known writing on Earth, but the Dispilio tablet might be the definitive article. This object disproves the idea that the ancient Sumerians came up with the concept of writing 6,000 years ago. But not all archaeologists are comfortable with the idea of shaking up the timeline of writing with such a bold statement. That's why the tablet has been attracting controversy ever since it was discovered in a lake close to Kastoria in northern Greece in 1993. As it's made of wood, the tablet can be dated, and it's been shown to be over 7,250 years old. Unfortunately, as we have nothing to compare it to, translating the text has not been possible. It might contain a deep philosophical statement about the nature of life, or it could be someone's shopping list. Unless we're able to recover more examples of the same writing, we may never know for sure. That means that we'll never know who created it either. We might be able to take credit for the invention of writing away from the Sumerians, but we don't know who to award it to instead. You might have seen our next artifact in the news recently. It's an unusual ancient Egyptian coffin, and in January 2023 it was returned to Cairo from the United States of America after a campaign to have it repatriated. The unusual thing about the coffin is that the likeness of the person painted on it is green, hence the rather basic name that's been given to it, the green sarcophagus. We know who the coffin was made for. It was a male priest called Ankhenmot. We also know when it was made. It was the late dynastic period, more than 2,300 years ago. The reason it's been returned to Cairo is that it entered the USA illegally. It was looted from a necropolis in Abu Sir years ago, after which it was sold to buyers in Germany before being sold again to the Houston Museum of Natural Science in 2013. There's no suggestion that the museum was aware that the sarcophagus had been looted. It won't have been an easy thing for the museum to give up. Most experts agree that its value is somewhere in the region of $1 million. It's a common misconception that sharks have a particular taste for human flesh. Sharks only eat humans very rarely, and there's no evidence to suggest they specifically go looking for them. Besides, sharks are omnivores. All manner of things have been found inside the stomachs of sharks over the years. This cannonball, for example. The cannonball was found inside a shark's stomach by fishermen in the West Indies in 1832. However, there's a plot twist. Scientists don't think the shark specifically ate the cannonball. They think someone was shot with the cannonball, fell into the water after death, and were subsequently eaten, cannonball and all, by the shark. We said that sharks eat people only very rarely, but we never said that it doesn't happen at all. Other bizarre items found inside shark stomachs over the years include an entire fur coat, a bulldog still on its lead, and even an entire medieval suit of armor. The finding of the suit of armor was recorded by the French naturalist Guillaume Rondelet in the 16th century. He concluded that the shark mistook the suit for a seal. In April 2022, dredge workers at Dengie Quarry in Kent, England, were going about their typical daily work when they made a discovery so astonishing that it went on to be featured in a documentary made by the BBC. It's a large 16th century shipwreck, and it baffled experts when it was found, because it's more than 1,000 feet inland. The Elizabethan-era vessel still hasn't been identified, so it's been nicknamed the Ship of Dungeness. Around 100 timbers of the ship's hull still remain, but it's thought that it was 80 feet long when it was complete. Tree ring dating checks carried out on the timbers have revealed the wood used in the ship's construction is English oak and was cut down between 1558 and 1580. Dengie Quarry has existed as a shingle quarry since the 1940s, and the vessel has presumably been there this entire time, so it's remarkable that it wasn't discovered until now. Very few ships that were built during the reign of the famous Queen Elizabeth I in England have survived to the present day, so the remains of the vessel are a precious archaeological resource. Archaeological excavations have been ongoing at the site of Izanoy, an ancient city in Turkey, for several years. They've turned up some remarkable things, and in December 2022, archaeologists there struck gold again, metaphorically speaking, when they found the severed stone heads of several Greek gods. Specifically, they found the heads of Eros, Dionysus, Heracles, plus several more. As they're made of stone, it's hard to say exactly when the sculptures were created. Izanoy was founded during the days of the Phrygia kingdom during the Hellenistic period. It was controlled by the Romans from around 2,100 years ago, but most of its monumental buildings were erected during the 3rd century. It's most likely that the stone heads come from that period. The city eventually fell into decline during the 7th century, with several buildings on the former Temple Hill torn down to make way for a new citadel. All of these heads would once have been attached to bodies, but the bodies are nowhere to be found. The decapitation was a deliberate act, but we don't know why it was done. The Uluburun shipwreck is thought to be 3,300 years old, but nobody knows for sure. It can be found off the southwest coast of Turkey and is said to be one of the oldest shipwrecks in the whole world, not to mention one of the richest. Turkish sponge divers came across the wreck by accident in 1982, sparking a frenzy of marine archaeological activity, which resulted in the retrieval of valuable copper ingots along with ceramic containers full of grapes and figs. The design of the ship suggests that it came from Cyprus, although a Syro-Palestinian origin is also possible. There's so little wood left that carbon dating is impossible, and so the estimate of 3,300 years comes from a gold scarab engraved with the name of the Egyptian queen Nefertiti. Given its size and the amount of cargo, it's safe to say that this would have been a devastating loss for whoever had paid for it to sail. A November 2022 study concluded that there's so much bronze aboard that it can't all have been destined for one customer, meaning that there may have been a complex trade network in the Mediterranean all that time ago. It's also been proven that the tin ingots found aboard the vessel came from a remote mine in Uzbekistan, further adding to the mystery. Our next discovery takes us to Sweden, where the wrecks of two 14th century seafaring vessels known as cogs were discovered in Varberg in spring of 2022. The cogs were found in land that was earmarked for an archaeological survey ahead of the planned construction of a railway tunnel. The land is dry now, but during the medieval era, this was the shoreline of a town called Gedekar. Cogs from this era are rare discoveries, and finding two of them so close to each other is unprecedented. To make the discovery even better, the larger of the two cogs is the best preserved example of its kind ever to be found in Sweden. Almost the entire port side of the ship still exists, measuring 67 feet long and 16 feet wide. There's less left of the smaller cog, with only a section of hull measuring 26 feet by 15 feet surviving. Analysis of timber samples indicates that the larger vessel was built in 1346 and the smaller one in 1357. The wood comes from France and Poland, so these weren't local ships. It's not yet clear what caused either of them to sink, or whether the sinkings occurred at the same time. In 2021, a bronze artifact known as the Hand of Irilegi was unearthed at the castle of Irilegi in Navarre, Spain. The ruined castle was built during the Iron Age, and the bronze hand is thought to be around 2,100 years old. Historians and linguistics experts have been studying it ever since it was found because of the symbols etched into its surface, and in November 2022, some of them came to a surprising conclusion. These symbols are, in fact, the oldest known use of written Basque. Only the first word has been translated thus far, but experts are convinced it's Sorioniku, which translates into English as good luck. It's possible that the remaining words on the hand are references to early Basque gods, or perhaps holy places that were known to the people of the time but not to us today. The culture responsible for the creation of the bronze hand was the Vascones, who were the ancestors of the modern Basque people. We don't know when they adopted or created this Iberian language, but we now know that it happened at least 2,100 years ago. If you were watching arts and culture news in early November 2022, you might have seen reports of an outstanding collection of ancient bronze statues that have recently been discovered in Tuscany, Italy. Archaeologists found the works of art while excavating bathhouses in San Cassiano di Bagni, which isn't far from Siena. The sculptures were hidden beneath pools of thermal water, preserved and protected by thick layers of mud. The site is still fed by the same geothermal springs that inspired the Etruscans to build the bathhouses around 2,300 years ago. Legend has it that the site was first founded by Porsenna, the Etruscan king of Chiusi, but there's no evidence to support the idea. The bathhouses went on to be a popular leisure destination during the Roman era and were a favorite spot of Caesar Augustus. 24 statues have been found in total, including a seeping depiction of Hygeia, the Roman goddess of cleanliness. A statue of Apollo has also been found, as well as depictions of various emperors, women, and children. It seems the statues were buried on purpose, but we have no idea why. The Grolier Codex sounds like the latest smash hit science fiction movie. In fact, it's one of the most complex documents ever found by archaeologists. It's so unusual that scientists have been arguing for years about whether it's genuine or a forgery. Now they've all had to accept that it's the real deal. The Grolier Codex is really a calendar belonging to the mysterious Mayan civilization, and was created and added to between the years 1021 and 1154. It was found in Mexico. When Spanish conquistadors arrived there, They destroyed every artifact belonging to the Mayans they could find. Almost nothing survived, but this did. And now it's the oldest known surviving Mayan document. It's also the oldest book of the Americans. The glyph symbols are hard to translate, but experts believe that as well as acting as a calendar, it also makes predictions for the future. Given that the Mayans were known for their doomsday prophecies, perhaps it's better we never find out what it says. In 2018, the Grolier Codex was officially renamed the Códice Maya de Mexico. Here's an amazing discovery from October 2022. It's a massive mosaic that dates back to the Roman era of Syria, containing panels that tell the story of the Trojan War. It's a remarkable find, and it's made all the more remarkable that it narrowly escaped being broken into pieces and sold on the black market by terrorists. The mosaic is 16,000 years old and was found inside the ruins of a 4th century building in Al-Rastan. It covers an incredible 1,300 square feet. It's thought that it was first found in 2015 and seized by Daesh, which controlled territories in the region at the time. In 2017, a figure representing the group listed the mosaic for sale, but fortunately it was bought by Lebanese business people who recognized its importance and donated it back to the Syrian state in 2022 when it was deemed safe to do so. Despite depicting the Trojan War, the mosaic doesn't contain any depictions of Achilles or the Trojan horse. Modern-day historians are increasingly convinced that Achilles was a mythical figure, and the Trojan horse was a metaphorical description of the deceitful tactics that Greek soldiers employed during the war. Archaeologists and scientists know more about the world around us than most of us, but it doesn't mean that they know everything. Sometimes a discovery will be made that confuses and mystifies even the brightest minds, and the experts are left just as amazed by it as the rest of us are. Everything you're about to see in this video is an incredible discovery from a bygone age, but one for which we have no explanation for. Be careful, this video might blow your mind. Almost every civilization in the world has stories and legends about giants, and yet we've never found evidence that a giant species of humans ever existed. Or have we? There have been photographs of enormous human skeletons being excavated from the ground all over the internet since 2004. But no single story about giants ever got as much attention as the one that appeared in the Hindu Voice Monthly in 2007. According to that article, these pictures came from the unearthing of a massive skeleton by a team from National Geographic in India in March 2007. Many people think that the pictures speak for themselves, but it didn't take long for people to start calling them hoaxes or frauds. If this is the work of Photoshop, it must have been a very talented graphic artist. It's not surprising that the world's authorities would want to discourage people from believing the photos are real. So, is it really a fake? Or is the fake story just a cover-up of a truly astonishing discovery? Even in this age of advanced video games, many of us like to sit down with friends or family every now and then to play a good old-fashioned board game. When we do, we're taking part in a form of entertainment that goes back thousands of years, and one which has mysterious origins. Also known as the Game of 20 Squares, the royal game of was first played in ancient Mesopotamia 4,500 years ago. But curiously, an almost identical game was played all over the Middle East and the Mediterranean during times of antiquity. We have no idea of the rules of the game, but it involved both dice and pawns, suggesting it was complicated. Some Babylonian tablets found at the same time as some of the royal game of boards seem to imply that there might even have been an element of fortune-telling involved in the game. Were our ancestors just passing the time when they sat down to play it? Or were they trying to discover the secrets of their futures? This heavily decorated skull looks like the early stages of the process we would go through today to replicate the appearance of a person from their skull. But it's actually an ancient Aztec artifact. There have been several examples of skulls like this found in Mexico, including the skull of the smoking mirror, and they're thought to be depictions of the mighty creator god Tezcatlipoca. A real human skull is used as the base of pieces like this, with the back of the skull cut away so the interior can be lined with fur from a deer. A hinge was also fitted so the jaw, still containing its original teeth, could be moved. Straps would then be fitted into the skull so Aztec priests could wear them during ceremonies. It must have made them appear terrifying, but we can only guess at the purpose of the rituals. What kind of purpose could be served by wearing such frightening headgear? And why did the Aztecs always choose blue turquoise tiles to decorate the skulls with? The color was clearly important, but we'll probably never know why. Scientists are so reluctant to consider the type of technology that went into creating the Yonaguni monument that they would rather completely ignore it. Ask them and they'll tell you that this ancient Japanese site was created by nature, not nurture. Found underwater below the Ryukyu Islands, this site is more than 10,000 years old and is sometimes described as Japan's answer to the legendary lost city of Atlantis, because it was once above the waves instead of beneath them. While we can't argue that sandstone does occasionally break off in straight lines and block shapes when it erodes, it's less common to see triangle shapes in naturally eroded sandstone. There's no shortage of triangles at Yonaguni, and nor would erosion explain the series of holes that appear to have been drilled into the stones. 4,000-year-old stone tools and pottery fragments have been found at the site, confirming it was once inhabited. But what kind of 10,000-year-old technology could have done this? Who could the builders of the monument possibly have been? Depending on who you believe, the Koso artifact is either a 100-year-old geological anomaly or a riddle that dates back 500,000 years. There's no debate about what sits at the center of the artifact. It's a spark plug, made by the company Champion during the 1920s. Plenty of them have been thrown away over the years, but only this one has managed to find its way right into the center of an iron oxide shell that has been tested and proved to be 500,000 years old. The casing completely surrounds the spark plug, which was discovered by accident in 1961 in California by two prospectors on the hunt for geodes. There's no way that the spark plug could have been pushed into the middle of the rock. So how did the rock form around the shell? With no better explanation available, some people point to the Koso artifact as evidence that time travel is real, and that sometimes time travelers accidentally leave objects behind themselves on their travels. There are as many names for this object as there are theories about its origin. Most people call it the Sabu disk, but we've also seen it called the schist disk and the Saqqara disk, the latter name being given because it was found in Egypt's North Saqqara in 1936. It looks a lot like a steering wheel, so alien conspiracy theorists like to imagine that it was a control device for an ancient spaceship. Scientists are quick to call that idea ridiculous, but they struggle to come up with a better explanation for how a wheel-shaped object could have turned up in Egypt 5,000 years ago, during a time before Egyptians had even invented the wheel. The soft rock that the artifact is made from would break under the slightest pressure put in the wrong place, and it's only 1 inch thick in places. If it was supposed to be a sculpture, it was made out of the least suitable material for the job. Some people think it might be an ornate candlestick holder, but if so, why haven't we found anything else that looks like it in all the years we've been excavating Egyptian tombs? Sticking with the topic of strange discoveries in the desert, meet Ata, the 6-inch high skeleton from the Atacama Desert that some people believe is the body of a tiny alien. To make it even creepier, the skeleton was found in the churchyard of a deserted town called Lenoria. Testing on the skeleton has revealed that it's less than 100 years old. But so far, we've been unable to say who or where it came from conclusively. Scientists looking for a rational explanation have tried to write it off as a non-viable human fetus, but that wouldn't explain the strange cranium of the body. Another theory is that it's the body of a human who suffered from chronic dwarfism, but the smallest living human ever recorded was 4 times larger than this. Researchers at Stanford University were given 6 whole months to study the body in 2003, But even after all that time, they couldn't come up with a satisfactory explanation for its existence. It's definitely not a hoax, but we may never know what species or race little Ada belonged to. This magnificent bronze sculpture of a horse deserved a better fate than sitting at the bottom of a well in Germany for 2,000 years. But when it finally returned to the surface in 2009, it provoked a lot of controversy. Sculptures like this have been found before, and we can say with reasonable certainty that it once belonged to a much larger statue of the famous Roman Emperor Augustus sat atop the horse. While we can explain that, we can't explain the location it was found in. The discovery was part of a newly uncovered 20-acre ancient Roman site, but the site was curiously devoid of any military buildings. Even more strangely, the Roman site was surrounded on all sides by land belonging to ancient Germanic tribes. The history books have always told us that the Romans expanded by conquering their neighbors and ruling with an iron fist. But the settlement that this horse came from appears to have lived peacefully with its native tribal neighbors. Perhaps the Romans were a little more friendly than we thought. If you want to build something to last, the best approach is to make it out of stone or steel. The ancient sculptures and statues we've dragged out of the ground over the centuries have almost all been crafted from stone. But there is one very notable exception to that rule. This is the Shigir idol. It's more than 11,500 years old, and it spent the majority of that time in a peat bog in the eastern Ural Mountains. The peat turned out to be the perfect preservative for the statue, which is the oldest wooden artifact known to exist anywhere in the world. When it was created by a mysterious civilization during the Mesolithic era, the last ice age had only just come to an end. The 9-foot-high idol was painstakingly put back together by Professor D. Lobanov, following on from its 1894 discovery, but he believed that there might be 3 or 4 pieces missing, so it may once have been even taller. Given the number of different faces that appear on the statue, it might have been used as a totem pole, but as we have no idea who made it, that's only a guess. Imagine this scenario. You're on the beautiful Pompano Beach in Florida, enjoying a walk, and you come across a beautiful blue object sitting on the sand, around the size of a softball. You start to imagine that you found a precious stone or mineral, and it might be your lucky day, and so you go to pick it up, only to discover that instead of being hard and smooth, it's soft and fleshy. After you got over the shock and horror of that feeling, you begin to wonder what it is. And the answer is that we still don't know. The person who found it took it to the Fish and Wildlife Research Institute of Florida for investigation, and they think it's the eye of a dead sea creature. The tiny fragments of bone that cling to the outer shell of the sphere prove that it's neither a squid or a jellyfish, so they suggest that it might have come from a swordfish. We're not sure we buy that explanation. How big must the swordfish have been if the eye alone could fill up the palm of your hand? We know so little about this jade carving that even determining what it's supposed to represent depends upon your own interpretation. Look at it closely. What do you see? A warrior pulling a terrifying face sat on top of a monster, perhaps? Is he supposed to be a god or a mythical beast? If we could say for sure, we might know a little bit more about the civilization who made the carving. That would be useful because they might change a whole lot of what we know about ancient China. The official history of the land says that the Shang dynasty was the first to live in China, around 4,000 years ago. This jade cylinder, however, is at least 1,000 years older than that. Given the relative sophistication of its design, it would be too simplistic to call it the work of a detached tribe or hunter-gatherers. We may therefore have to rewrite the history books and start looking for further evidence of an advanced people living in China before the days of the Shang dynasty, possibly one which based itself around Liangzhu, where the cylinder and its strange carving was found. The discovery of a 15th century skeleton on the Venetian island of Lazaredo Nuovo caused quite a stir in 2012. Because it had a stake driven straight through its gaping jaw. At first, the archaeologists working at the site assumed that the poor woman in the grave had suffered a violent death. But further investigation revealed something far stranger. The stake had been hammered through her skull post-mortem. Matteo Borini, who has had the opportunity to examine the body, believes that the body points to a 16th century fear of vampires. During times of plague, bodies were thrown into mass graves to save on space and cost. When the graves were opened to add more bodies, gravediggers were shocked and petrified to see that the hair and fingernails of the previously bodied corpses appeared to have grown. Not only that, thanks to chemical corrosion from the decaying bodies, the burial shrouds appeared to have been shredded and torn. The only conclusion that the people of the time could reach is that the dead weren't staying dead, and so they hammered a stake through them to make sure they didn't claw their way back up to the surface. What's the difference between a normal archaeological find and an incredible archaeological find? Keep watching this video and you'll find out. We've been sifting through the world's greatest archaeological discoveries to identify the very best of them, and we've come up with a fantastic collection. From small mysteries to big revelations, this is the archaeological video that's got it all. If we say someone has a golden tongue, we usually mean that they're very good at speaking persuasively. We don't generally mean the phrase to be taken literally, but it seems that someone in Egypt did several thousand years ago. In late 2020, a 2,000-year-old mummy was found at the ancient site of Taposiris Magna, and immediately stunned archaeologists because of the presence of the solid gold tongue wedged into its mouth. They still don't know what to make of the find. The current prevailing theory is that the owner of the unusual prosthetic might have lost their real tongue for some reason during their lifetime, and was given this golden replacement to ensure that they could speak to the gods on their journey into the afterlife. Any material could have been used for the tongue if that was the case, though, so the choice to use gold must also have had a symbolic meaning that we don't understand. Identifying the occupant of the tomb has thus far proved to be impossible. If we can do that, we might be on our way to getting some answers. Construction workers in San Francisco, California, USA, got the shock of a lifetime as they renovated a garage in 2016. When they dug up the concrete floor, they found a tiny lead and bronze coffin buried underneath it. The coffin has windows, and through the windows, they saw the remains of a young girl in such an excellent state of preservation that her skin and long blonde hair are still intact. In her hands, she holds a single red rose clasped over her chest. The house stands on the grounds of the former Oddfellows Cemetery, which was shut down and then built over in 1890, meaning the girl had been buried for at least that long, and possibly even longer. The owner of the home nicknamed the girl Miranda and contacted the Garden of Innocence charity in the hope that they'd be able to identify her. That task wasn't easy because of the lack of engravings or inscriptions on the coffin, but they eventually identified her as Edith Cook after studying local obituaries and identifying a living relative for a DNA sample. Edith passed away at the age of 2 years and 10 months in October 1876. The circumstances of her death remain unknown, but at least she finally has a name. Fashions and trends change a lot when it comes to hairstyles. The mullet used to be fashionable during the 1980s, for example, but it generally isn't seen as such today. Thanks to a recent discovery at Amarna, Egypt, we now know how the ancient Egyptians wore their hair 3,300 years ago. Many of the people buried at the site still have all their hair, and the elaborate nature of their hairstyles is surprising. The most notable example is a woman who had 70 extensions arranged in different layers and dyed a vibrant shade of red. That suggests that people were concerned about hiding their gray hair all those years ago, so some things about human vanity never change. Scientists think that henna might have been used to create the dye, but they're not yet 100% sure of that. In 1 or 2 cases, long hair was attached to a skull cap, so bald men might have worn wigs. Several of the individuals appear to have artificially curled their hair around their ears, which must also have been a fashion trend of the era. Perhaps Amarna was the place that the perm was invented. The El Peruhuaca archaeological site in Guatemala is one of the most important treasure troves of information about the Maya in all of South America. Among the most fascinating discoveries made at the site are a collection of 1,500 ceramic figurines, some of which are so ornate and detailed that they even have removable helmets. We think of objects like these as children's toys today, but they probably had a far more significant spiritual meaning to the ancient Mayans. A collection of 23 such figurines was found inside a vaulted masonry tomb chamber inside a funerary pyramid, which is thought to have been built for a former ruler of Waka. They were carefully arranged in a circle at the time of their discovery. One of the figures is a deer with the letter T carved into its surface, identifying the deer as the ruler's spirit companion. Other figures include a warrior queen, dancers, scribes, and another male figure, who might represent the king's heir. We might never know the meaning of the arrangement or the function of the figures in it, but it was clearly very significant to whoever put them there. On July 9, 1845, John Gregory wrote a letter to his wife while enjoying a brief stopover in Greenland on his way to take part in an Arctic survey. That was the last time she or anybody else ever heard from him. In April 2021, his remains were finally identified. Gregory was one of almost 130 men under the command of Sir John Franklin when Franklin's two ships, the HMS Terror and the HMS Erebus, became trapped in the Arctic ice. They'd come all the way from England to explore the Northwest Passage through the Canadian Arctic in the hope of establishing a new trade route. When they got stuck in the ice close to King William Island, around 20 men stayed on the ships and perished there. 105 of them abandoned ship and struck out in the hope of finding civilization, but never did. A note found inside a stone cairn on the island confirms that the group were still alive as of April 1848, but their fate after that is unknown. Most of them were buried close to the cairn, including John Gregory. DNA taken from his remains has been matched to his living descendants, finally resolving the age-old family mystery of what happened to him. What was the purpose of these 7,000-year-old stone structures in the Saudi Arabian desert? Are they, as some people believe, evidence of a prehistoric cattle cult? There are more than 1,000 of the structures in the desert. They are known to the locals as mustals, a word which, when translated into English, means rectangles, and describes their shape rather than their purpose. The typical shape of a mustal is a rectangle with a platform at each end, connected by straight walls at each side. It's theorized that they might once also have had a central chamber, perhaps containing a standing stone. In 2019, a previously undisturbed mustal was discovered, within which the bones of cattle, sheep, goats, and gazelles were found to have been deliberately buried. That's enough evidence for some archaeologists to suggest that the animals might have been sacrificial offerings to the gods. That opinion hasn't gone unchallenged, though. Other experts feel that these might have been holding pens for the animals, which would suggest that the ancient occupants of Saudi Arabia were the first in the world to set up farms. The megapolis of Teotihuacan is the most famous of all the ancient Mayan structures. Its distinctive architectural style has long been thought to be unique, but a discovery made in early 2021 challenges that assessment. It seems that someone built a mini replica of Teotihuacan's famous citadel in the city of Tikal. LiDAR data has revealed a structure buried beneath the Mundo Perdido that looks almost identical to the famous pyramid of Teotihuacan. As this discovery is so recent, the site has not yet been excavated. What makes this find all the more astonishing is that Tikal and Teotihuacan are separated by a distance of more than 600 miles. Archaeologists think that the presence of the structure might indicate a friendship or a shared culture between the people of ancient Mexico and ancient Guatemala. one that was probably spoiled when invaders from Teotihuacan took Tikal by force around a century after this newly discovered structure is thought to have been built. Over 100,000 people lived in Teotihuacan during its peak years, so it remains possible that some of its former residents might have traveled to other parts of South America and attempted to recreate their former home in their new surroundings. We'll hopefully learn more when the structure is dug up and examined. When Thomas Carlson went out walking in a forest in his home country of Sweden in April 2021, his only intention was to survey the area for his local orienteering club. Discovering Bronze Age treasure was probably the last thing on his mind, but he did it anyway. Thomas found more than 50 objects half buried in the forest floor. Among the collection are fine examples of bracelets, necklaces, and clothespins. He's handed his finds to professional historians and archaeologists, who believe them to be in the region of 2,500 years old. They wouldn't be in such excellent condition if they'd spent all that time half in and half out of the ground. So Thomas thinks it's likely they've recently been disturbed by either storms or animals. Thomas was walking close to the small town of Alingsås when he made his discovery, and the town is now experiencing a small gold rush. Archaeologists believe that there may be more discoveries to be made in the area, so there are dozens of them scouring the forests right now in the hope of finding treasures of their own. There are several occasions in your life when you might choose to have a ring custom made for yourself. Weddings and engagements are the most obvious examples. Experts think that this 370-year-old gold ring, discovered on England's Isle of Man by metal detectorist Lee Morgan in early 2021, might have been made for a more unusual purpose. To be more specific, they think it might have been made as a tribute to a beheaded earl. The beautiful gold ring, which has an unusually thin band for its era, is topped by a stunning crystal stone. Beneath the stone, 2 letters are picked out in gold thread, the letters J and D. Historian Alison Fox, an expert on the English Civil War, believes the initials might be a reference to James Stanley, the 7th Earl of Derby and a prominent supporter of the Royalist side of the war. He signed his official correspondence J. Derby, so JD would be an acceptable abbreviation. Only someone of great wealth, or the family of such a person, would be able to afford such a beautiful piece of jewelry 370 years ago. The fact that it appears to be a mourning ring, consistent with the style that was fashionable during the Stuart era of the 17th and 18th centuries, strengthens the idea that it belonged to a bereaved friend or family member of the unfortunate Earl, who was executed because of his pro-royalist beliefs. The act of ceremonial burial is part of what separates us from animals. It's one of the very oldest human traditions, and as of May 2021, we now know that it dates back even further than we've always imagined it to in Africa. The oldest known human burial site on the African continent has recently been found in the entrance of Pangayasaida Cave on the South Kenyan coast, and it contains the remains of a child. The infant, who was around 3 years old at the time of their death, was buried approximately 78,000 years ago. The child was wrapped in a shroud and then entombed in a pit, with their head resting on a pillow. The broken shells of giant African land snails were buried beneath the pit, but the experts aren't yet sure whether they're related to the burial practice or not. As staggering as the age of this burial is, it still isn't the oldest human burial site in the world. Evidence of deliberate human burials that happened 100,000 years ago has been found at the Kafse and Eskul caves in Israel, and there are alleged grave sites in Europe that are 20,000 years older than that. In March 2021, a crew of workmen was hired to carry out land improvements on a farm on the Dingle Peninsula of County Kerry, Ireland. Their work was brought to a sudden halt by the discovery of a previously unknown Bronze Age tomb standing on the land, and inside the tomb, a very mysterious stone. Archaeologists are still working at the scene as of May 2021, but they've found enough evidence to support the idea of it being at least 3,000 years old. It's a chamber tomb containing a stone-lined underground structure that could have been used to house the remains of a whole family of people, topped with a large capstone. It's not the capstone that's prompting so much interest, though. It's the presence of a large oval-shaped polished stone inside the tomb, a practice that has never before been noted in Bronze Age burials of this kind. The stone was placed next to the one set of human remains found inside the tomb, which was presumably a deliberate act, but the meaning of the act is unknown. It's a reminder that as much as we think we know a lot about our ancestors, there's still probably more that we don't know than we do. If you know a thing or two about Norse mythology, you'll have heard the myth of Ragnarok before. According to Viking legend, it was to be an end-of-days event that would result in the death of the gods and the destruction of the whole world in a ball of flame. Warding off Ragnarok was something of a preoccupation for the god-fearing Vikings, which is why they created this impression of an enormous boat in a volcanic cave and then practically cremated animals as a sacrificial tribute inside it. The cave is in Iceland and was created by the eruption of a volcano roughly 1,100 years ago. That isn't long after the Vikings colonized the country, so they probably made a connection between the two events and presumed they'd angered the gods in some way. As soon as the lava cooled, these ancient settlers entered the cave and made the outline of a Viking boat with the rocks they found inside it. They also left 63 beads, many of which originally came from a rock, and the remains of a mineral called orpiment, which was used to decorate objects and would originally have come from Turkey. Taken all together, it means that the Vikings went to great lengths to perform what presumably would have been a lavish, large-scale ceremony. The world still hasn't been engulfed in a ball of flame, so perhaps the gods were appeased after all. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and enjoy watching new videos on my channel. Thanks for watching, and see you soon!